A very good morning, respected seniors and dear colleagues. Today, the CGR topic will be the clinical profile, outcome and challenges in the management of pediatric Burkitt's lymphoma that we have encountered in the Department of Hematology. Let's start it with the case. It's a 5-year-old school-going male child who presented to the pediatric surgery unit with history of sudden onset, severe colicky pain, abdominal pain, constipation for 3 days, associated with nausea, vomiting, a palpable abdominal mass, with a history of recent surgery for ileocolic intussusception in a private setup due to a similar episode that occurred 3 months ago. On examination, the obvious positive findings was the distended abdomen with visible irregular mass, a previous surgical scar over the right iliac fossa, and a large firm lobulated mass measuring 10 cross 7 cross 6 centimeter involving the iliac region and the umbilical region. So baseline investigations was done, which showed an unremarkable hemogram with no peripheral abnormal cells. However, when we see the chemistry, there was hypocalcemia, hyperkalemia, along with elevated LDH more than 6,000 units, with hyperuricemia and an increased serum creatinine levels for the age, which means that the patient was in auto tumor lysis. And an imaging was also performed which showed an heterogeneous enhancing mesenteric mass of 10 cross 5 cross 14 centimeter in the abdominal cavity arising from the root of the mesentery and extending up to the bifurcation of aorta with mild hepatosplenomegaly, and a possibility of lymphoma was considered. So let us go into what the historical perspective of this interesting tumor is. It was first described by Dr. Dennis Burkitt, who was a surgeon, an Irish surgeon working in Uganda. He noted a large number of African children affected with rapidly growing jaw tumors, and he called them a sarcoma, and he published them in NEJM as the jaw tumors query sarcoma. And in 1961, he called some of his colleagues to evaluate about this tumor, where an American doctor, Dr. O'Connor, analyzed did the histopathology of the tumor and did histochemical workup and called it as lymphomas. In 1964, Epstein and Yvonne Barr isolated EBV from these tumor samples via a tumor culture. So these are the milestones that we have come across in understanding of Burkitt's lymphoma over the past century, from the very first description as a jaw tumor by Albert Cook in 1902 till this year. We have understood a lot of things regarding to this tumor, and it has also started from a simple therapy of oral methotrexate to inclusion of monoclonal antibodies, and with overall survival ranging from 5 to almost 96% over this past century. Burkitt's lymphoma is called the Rosetta Stone of oncogenesis. It has a multiple first to its hat because it was the first tumor to have a viral association. Previously, the infective etiology of oncogenesis was not accepted. It was the first tumor to have a translocation-induced activation of oncogene. It was the first HIV-associated lymphoma, and it's one of the very first tumors to have polymicrobial etiology. It's a highly aggressive mature B-cell neoplasm caused by translocation, leading to dysregulation of the c-MYC gene. And it is the fastest growing human tumor with doubling time less than 25 hours, with a great propensity to spread and invade CNS and very early relapses. The point of interest is that despite being all these, it has a very good survival rate, and the outcome have drastically improved over the years, and it's extremely chemosensitive. So let's see the incidence of pediatric non-Hodgkin lymphoma. This is the data from the world, where in children less than 14 years, Burkitt's forms a major chunk of the non-Hodgkin lymphomas, accounting for up to 38% of non-Hodgkin lymphomas, whereas in adolescent, it comes just next to DLBCL and in par with lymphoblastic lymphomas, contributing up to 20% of NHLs. In Indian data, DLBCL still tops among all the pediatric age group. We don't have an age bar here. All children less than 18 years, DLBCL tops, and Burkitt's and Burkitt-like lymphoma contributes together up to 20% of the chunk. So let's understand the pathogenesis of Burkitt's lymphoma, since it was one of the rosette stone of tumorigenesis. What happens is that recurrent B cell activation in the form of infections with falciparum malaria or EBV increases the translocation load in naive germinal center B cells. So then there are these translocated B cells, and the translocation leads to overexpression of c-MYC. But only c-MYC overexpression cannot form lymphoma. It needs a second hit in the form of recurrent inflammations and cytokines, so that there is an anti-apoptotic advantage to these translocated B cells, leading to formation of Burkitt's lymphoma. We don't know the time interval between the translocation load and the anti-apoptotic advantage, but this is the proposed pathogenesis in the model of Burkitt's lymphoma. So what happens because of the c-MYC dysregulation? Though c-MYC dysregulation has been described in a variety of neoplasms, it is a primary initiating event in Burkitt's lymphoma. The most common translocation in Burkitt's lymphoma is translocation 814 involving c-MYC and the heavy chain, contributing up to 90% of the tumor, contributing to the translocation in almost 90% of the tumors. 10 to 15% of the tumors can have translocation involving the c-MYC and the light chains kappa and lambda with translocation 822 and 28. The ultimate result is an overexpression of c-MYC protein, leading to genomic instability, uncontrolled cell proliferation, escape from immune surveillance, immortalization, and the tumor being independent of any growth factors for its survival. This is a recent classification of Burkitt's lymphoma given by the World Health Organization classification of hematolymphoid neoplasms. There are three groups: the endemic, sporadic, and the immunodeficiency associated. So the endemic group, the most common age group is 4 to 7 years and is commonly seen in equatorial Africa. The common tumor sites involved are the jaw, abdomen, and the CNS, and they have 95% association with Epstein-Barr virus, and of course the defining translocations are always present. So this is the endemicity. If we see why Burkitt's lymphoma is one of the malignancies which has polymicrobial etiology, we can see that this is the area of increased P. falciparum incidence, and also this is the area where there's increased incidence of Burkitt's lymphoma, the so-called lymphoma belt. So when they analyzed, and the researchers, what they found was, in patients with Burkitt's lymphoma in this area, the antibody titer of both the P. falciparum and the EBV was quite high. So the next is the sporadic, which we usually face in our country. The age distribution is bimodal. It is seen both in the pediatric and also in the adult group. And the common tumor sites involved are the abdomen, unlike the facial bones in the endemic group. The presence of EBV virus can be demonstrated up to 15%. And the next is the immunodeficiency associated. Like the sporadic, the age distribution is bimodal and can be seen worldwide. And the common tumor sites are also similar as that of sporadic. But the presence of EBV virus can be noted in up to 50% of these cases. So these are the clinical features. While endemic cases presents with the predilection to the facial bone, like with the jaw tumor and the orbital mass, the sporadic cases usually present with an abdominal mass or testicular involvement. The basic diagnostic workup should include a CBC with a peripheral smear, a renal function tests, and LDH levels to evaluate for spontaneous tumor lysis, and as imaging of the affected site with CT, an adequate surgical biopsy and or body fluids for histopathology, cytology, immunologic, cytogenetic, and molecular studies, and a staging workup should comprise of bone marrow aspiration biopsy, CSF fluid examination to rule out CNS involvement, CT scan of the chest, abdomen with contrast. In affording patients, PET-CT of course is really preferred. These are the pathologic features of the tumor. It has a very classic morphology. It's a small non-cleaved cell lymphoma with small to medium sized cells, basophilic cytoplasm, round nuclei, clumped or condensed chromatin with clear parachromatin and 1 to 2 nucleoli. Characteristically, the cytomorphology slides show cytoplasmic vacuolations which stain for fat stains like oil red O and Sudan black. And in the histopathology, what we had been taught from the very old UG days, the starry sky appearance. I already said you c-MYC has a lot of cellular proliferation, and it is also pro-apoptotic. So because of the increased amount of apoptosis, the tingible body macrophages in the lymph node tends to engulf the apoptotic cells. So these are the tingible body macrophages with the engulfed apoptotic cells, giving rise to the starry sky appearance. These are the stars, and the blue cells, which is dense and full of nucleus, forms the dark sky behind. If you see the immunophenotype, it is that of a mature B cell neoplasm, positive for B cell associated antigens like 19, 20, 79A, CD22, and it is a germinal cell neoplasm, so it is positive for CD10 and BCL6. Also, it is negative for TDT, thereby ruling out lymphoblastic lymphoma and proving again it is not immature. And the very high growth fraction can be seen by the very high Ki67 staining, reaching almost 99%. I already said that the doubling time of this tumor is less than 25 hours. So these are the differential diagnoses when we see the pathology. DLBCL, Burkitt's lymphoma, Burkitt's-like lymphoma, and classified. It is very important that we differentiate it from DLBCL. Though the management of Burkitt's lymphoma and Burkitt's-like lymphoma are all the same, it is very different from DLBCL. Classic DLBCL therapy like R-CHOP results in chemorefractoriness and poor outcome in patients with Burkitt's lymphoma if treated like DLBCL. So it is very, very important that before initiating therapy, we are absolutely clear of the diagnosis. So the clues to diagnose would be the growth rate, which can be demonstrated with the help of Ki67 staining, which will reach almost 100% in Burkitt's lymphoma and Burkitt's-like lymphoma, approaching 100%, but in DLBCL, it is usually lesser than that. And the c-MYC translocation is almost always present in Burkitt's lymphoma, whereas it is a secondary event and uncommon to be seen in DLBCL. EBV positivity again is seen in almost 90% of endemic and 40% of sporadic and HIV related, but it is not present in DLBCL. Burkitt's-like lymphoma has been subcategorized in the latest WHO as Burkitt-like lymphoma with 11q aberrations, high-grade B-cell lymphoma NOS, or high-grade B-cell lymphoma with double hits. So the staging system which we use in pediatric Burkitt's is that of St. Jude's, which is very similar to our Ann Arbor staging used elsewhere, where stage 1 is a single nodal or extranodal tumor. Stage 2 is more than or equal to 2 nodal tumors on the same side of the diaphragm. If both sides are involved, it's stage 3. If there is CNS or bone marrow involvement, it becomes stage 4. So the risk stratification is very important again because it involves the difference in treatment we are going to confer to this patient. If it is a stage 1 or 2 disease, which is completely resected with very minimal tumor load, it is called as A. If there is CNS or bone marrow involvement, it's called as C. The tumors which does not fit into A or C is called as B. This is a FAB classification which we routinely use in our clinical practice, and there is a BFM classification as well. So why are we subcategorizing it? Because of the prognostic impact, we can see that the survival and the event-free survival reaches 99% in patients of group A, and it reaches only 79% in group C patients. Again, bone marrow and CNS is important. We saw that we have to do a baseline CSF and bone marrow for staging as well, which again reflects in the event-free survival probability, which reaches 91% if both are negative, and it only is 61% if both are positive. So this was the drive-home message mainly of this CGR, the principles of therapy involved. We have to realize that this tumor and its diagnosis is an oncological emergency because of the involved tumor lysis syndrome, which can be spontaneous or auto TLS or post-therapy, and because of the rapid increase or the high proliferation rate, it can cause SVC syndrome, which again is a hematological emergency, and also because of cord compression, it can cause paraplegia. So the basic understanding is that we have to give short, intensive, multi-agent therapy in 3 to 5 days so that the rapid turnover is controlled. Also, because of the increased CNS propensity, we have to give parenchymal drugs with increased parenchymal uptake like high-dose methotrexate and cytarabine. And to increase the ventricular levels, we have to give repeated intrathecals. And if a patient is CNS positive at diagnosis, we have to consider cranial irradiation. So the therapy has evolved over the days. The very first therapy initiated by O'Connor with just oral methotrexate, followed by Denis Burkitt. Despite being a surgeon, he still formed the basis SCOP regimen, which is being still used with cyclophosphamide, vincristine, and prednisolone. And this lymphoma maligned Burkitt group uh, made this LMB protocols over the past 20 years. They've improvised from 81 version till 96 LMB 96 protocols, increasing the event-free survival in CNS negative cases from 75 to 96%, and in CNS positive cases from 19 to 75%. They also had managed in decreasing the duration of treatment from 12 months to as short as 4 months with reduced toxic death rates. They also identified that the pre-phase so-called COP, if the patient is not responding, is indicative of poorer prognosis. And also they aimed at reducing the therapy without jeopardizing the survival. It's a pity that despite all these, the patients in Africa usually are not willing or cannot go ahead with these protocols. So this is the general schema of Burkitt's in the LMB 96 protocol, which we follow in our institute. So if the tumor burden is high, as in group B or group C, we give a pre-phase of COP followed by an induction, consolidation, and maintenance as in any other hematological malignancy. The most crucial thing of managing of Burkitt's lymphoma is a good supportive care. It forms an integral part of pediatric Burkitt's lymphoma, and from the very beginning, even before starting the therapy, we have to start anticipating the complications. At diagnosis, tumor lysis syndrome has always to be anticipated. It has to be treated with intensive hydration, diuresis, allopurinol, and rasburicase prophylaxis. As a matter of fact, with the introduction of rasburicase in the management, the mortality, the induction mortality have rapidly reduced from 20 to 30% to less than 5%. Management of SBC syndrome and cord compression requires steroids and radiotherapy. And during treatment, because the treatment is aggressive and intensive, febrile neutropenia is a usual consequence, and we should also watch out for evidence of mucositis. So let's see what happened to our 5-year-old boy with abdominal pain. So this was a previous histopathology. You remember I was telling about that diagnosis of ileocholic intussusception where he underwent a surgery. It was outside reported as normal histology. However, the blocks were reviewed in SGPGI, and this was a histopathology image courtesy of Department of Pathology of our institute. We can see the blue skies with the stars. And these are the increased mitotic indices, which we can see, appreciate very well. So CD20 was positive by immunohistochemistry, proving that it's a B-cell neoplasm. BCL6 and CD10 was positive, showing the germinal center origin. And TDT was negative, ruling out lymphoblastic lymphoma. And we can see that almost every cell's nucleus has taken up the Ki67 stain, bright as brown, showing the high proliferation index. Based on this, a diagnosis of high-grade NHL suggestive of Burkitt's lymphoma was given. Unfortunately, we could not do the CMYC in this patient. So the patient was diagnosed in August 2018. He was a group B patient. He received COP pre-phase induction. We can see the PET CT here highlighting the abdominal mass and its PET avidity, increased FDG uptake. He underwent consolidation with SIM1 and 2 in October to November 2018. Then December 2018 to March 2019, he was on maintenance. We can see the PET after therapy is absolutely in remission. In March 2021, and 24 months into our follow-up, the patient is still in complete remission. It was a happy story. This was the image of him shared with return informed consent. Now, Dr. Priyanka will talk about our experience of pediatric Burkitt's lymphoma and our data over the past 5 years.
A very good morning, everyone. So now we would like to share the pediatric Burkitt's lymphoma data of the patients managed in our department. So a total diagnosed cases of 58 were diagnosed between 2015 to 2019. Out of this, 21 patients presented to hematology department directly, 26 patients presented to pediatric gastrology department, whereas 11 patients presented to pediatric surgery department. Out of these, 40 patients were eligible for our analysis because they were treated uniformly on the LMB French protocol with short intensive chemotherapy regimen. The demographic and clinical characteristics of these 40 patients is as described. The male-female ratio was 4.7:1. The median age was 11.5 years with a range of 4 to 18 years. Most of our patients belong to age group greater than 6 years. Amongst the primary tumor sites, 62% of our patients presented with abdominal presentation, followed by head and neck, CNS, bone marrow, and mediastinum. Most of our patients belong to stage 2 and stage 3 at presentation. Amongst the FAB risk group classification, in risk group A, there were 3 patients. In risk group B, 31 patients. And in risk group C, there were 6 patients. Almost in all of our patients, the LDH level was high at presentation, thereby implying that the disease was widespread at presentation. The median time from symptoms to diagnosis of Burkitt's lymphoma was 78 days, with a range of 15 to 168 days in our patients. ECOG performance status, 24 patients, that is 60%, were in performance status 0 to 2, whereas 40% of the patients were in performance status 3 to 4. 22% of our patients presented with clinical or lab tumor lysis syndrome at initial presentation. So out of the total diagnosed 58, we analyzed 40 patients. In group A, we had 3 patients, and post completion of chemotherapy, all are alive and in complete remission at 33 months of median follow-up. In group B, we had 31 patients. Out of these, 26 are alive and in complete remission. There were 2 relapses. One was an early relapse and one was late relapse. The early relapse patient succumbed during salvage chemotherapy, whereas the late relapse patient was salvaged with autologous stem cell transplant and is currently in a complete remission. There were 3 toxic deaths during chemotherapy. 2 were due to sepsis and 1 was due to tumor lysis syndrome with acute kidney injury. In group C, there were 6 patients. 3 are alive and in complete remission. There were 2 relapses and 1 toxic death due to sepsis. Now the Kaplan-Meier analysis for survival in our Burkitt's lymphoma patient. The 5-year event-free survival in our 40 patients was 78.2% with a median follow-up of 33 months, whereas the 5-year overall survival is 82.4%. Now, overall survival is stratified according to the FAB risk groups. In risk group A, the overall survival was 100%. In risk group B, the overall survival was 82.2%, whereas in risk group C, the overall survival was 44.4%. This implies that in risk group A and B, our overall survival was comparable to the foreign literature, whereas in group C, our overall survival was significantly lower as compared to the Western literature. So this is the area where we need to work around. Coming on to the univariate Cox proportional hazard analysis, the covariates that were responsible for decreasing the overall survival were LMB risk group, bone marrow involvement, CNS disease, performance status, and median time from diagnosis to treatment in days. Out of which LMB risk group, bone marrow involvement, CNS disease, and performance status have been interpreted in the original LMB risk group in the original LMB trials, whereas the median time from diagnosis to treatment, this covariate is unique for our cohort of patients. Again, in the multivariate Cox proportional hazard analysis, the bone marrow involvement, CNS disease, and median time from diagnosis to treatment retain their significance. Now coming to the treatment toxicity, the challenges that we face during treatment of these patients, apart from the acute complications, were the treatment related toxicities. Because we have already seen that the LMB protocol is quite an intensive protocol. So the toxicity related morbidity and mortality is quite a challenge in managing these patients. So our 40 patients received a total number of chemotherapy courses, 143. Out of which grade 3-4 febrile neutropenia was present in 52 cycles. The median duration of grade 3-4 neutropenia in days was 16 days with a range of 8 to 52 days, thereby increasing the hospital stay days as well as increasing the financial burden to the family. The incidence of grade 3-4 thrombocytopenia and grade 3-4 anemia requiring transfusion support was seen in around 90% of the cycles. Grade 3-4 mucositis was seen in 24% of our patients. thereby increasing the damage to the mucosal barrier, increasing risk of infections, the need for total parenteral nutrition, and thereby increasing mortality and morbidity in these patients. Hepatotoxicity and nephrotoxicity was seen in 3 and 2 patients, 2 cycles respectively. Further breakup of febrile neutropenic episodes, a total of 131 episodes of febrile neutropenia were encountered. Out of this, culture positive febrile neutropenic episodes were 28%, that is 37, and culture negative were 94. The median duration of hospital admission during febrile neutropenia was 16 with a range of 8 to 52. Amongst the culture positive infection, 70% of culture positive infections, the isolates were gram negative bacilli, whereas in 20% around, there was gram positive cocci being isolated. Mixed infections were present in around 10% of the cases. In the cases of gram negative bacilli sepsis, the incidence of carbapenem resistant Enterobacteriaceae was seen in 70% of our cases. This high incidence of multi-drug resistant organism sepsis is alarming because it can be life-threatening in these immunocompromised patients, and this highlights the need for better infection control practices as well as antibiotic stewardship. Number of our patients who required granulocyte transfusions during severe neutropenic episodes to salvage them were 4, and invasive pulmonary aspergillosis was seen in around 2.3% of our cases. So apart from the acute complications as well as the toxicities related to management, there were other challenges that we faced in our patient population. First and foremost in our low middle income country is financial and socio-economic issues. So we found that 80% of our patients belong to lower middle and upper lower class with an average family income of less than 20,000 per month. Thus, to afford the cost of such intensive chemotherapy was out of reach for most of our patients. Although 95% of our patients who receive treatment at our department avail financial support from government-sponsored schemes, however, the 18 patients who went LAMA or did not take therapy, the major cause, the primary cause of refusal of therapy was financial. Again, the delay in diagnosis, as I highlighted, was unique to our cohort of patients. The median time from symptoms to diagnosis of 78 days contributed to decreased overall survival, thereby highlighting the importance of creating awareness amongst the primary care physicians and the pediatricians to have high index of suspicion as well as to refer these patients early so that we can initiate management timely before the occurrence of complications. We cannot be sure about the sex bias in our cohort because of the small sample size. However, it is noteworthy that 8 patients who defaulted treatment, 6 were females. Also, the median distance a patient had to travel to avail treatment at our center was 264 kilometers with a range of 22 to 670 kilometers, thereby illustrating the need for development of more specialized centers in our country. Now I would request Dr. Anshul Gupta sir to present the conclusion. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So to conclude this session with some take-home messages that Burkitt lymphoma is a highly aggressive malignancy with excellent response to short-term intensive combination chemotherapy, and every case of Burkitt's lymphoma should be counseled for therapy. Because this is one of the few malignancies which have, if treated on time, has an excellent outcome. And early diagnosis and timely management is the key. Tumor lysis syndrome, febrile neutropenia, MDRO sepsis, mucositis are the major challenges in our country, and especially in a setup with a multi-specialty setup like ours, where there is a increased emergence of multi-drug resistant organism, and now we are running short of antibiotics to treat these neutropenic sepsis episodes. Apart from these conventional and important aspects, we also have to address as an oncologist the major financial and social factors which still pose a significant challenge for the families in our country. So as a clinical oncologist, we should really address all these issues in order to improve our survival of Burkitt's lymphoma. So these are of our survivors of Burkitt's lymphoma. We recently held one meeting in association with Cuddles Foundation, who's taking care of pediatric nutrition. And on Children's Day, we invited them, and they are as normal. Many of them are going to school, colleges, and since it's a pediatric tumor, so probably now they are coming back to life. And I came to know that recently one child whom we treated, that's standing in a blue shirt, got selected in NEET exam also. So that's really heartening to see that the patients, we have given a second life to them, and they are almost leading a normal life as previously. And I would like to thank our nursing staff, Sister Madhuri Smith, our ward in charges, Sister Pushpa, who have really motivated the other nursing staff for good nursing care during the management, because it's a malignancy. We could step up the treatment protocols only because of the good nursing care. Without them, it wouldn't have been possible. And in the end, I would also like to acknowledge the pediatric gastroenterology department and pediatric surgery department, who have given majority of these, given us this opportunity to treat these cases, because majority of referrals have come from them. Department of Pathology and Nuclear Medicine for making the diagnosis in a very short span of time, and for staging. And Nuclear Medicine department has really cooperated for giving us early dates for PET-CT, for whole body imaging, and these have all contributed. Department of Nephrology for taking care of our patients with acute renal failure, and they have always in the middle of the night given their support for dialysis support. And Department of Radiation Oncology for giving the radiation support in cases with bulky disease. So it's a joint effort, it's a multidisciplinary effort, and we have reached to this stage not because if the department wouldn't have contributed to support us. And finally, thank you. And this is our department, which has progressively grown over years. Thank you.